الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين أبي القاسم محمد وأهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. أما بعد، فقد قال الله تبارك وتعالى وقوله الحق وهو أصدق القائلين: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيتها النفس المطمئنة ارجعي إلى ربك راضية مرضية فادخلي في عبادي وادخلي جنتي. صدق الله العلي العظيم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Thank you very much for that introduction and the beautiful recitation of the Holy Quran. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept all of these amal from all of the brothers who are putting this program together. Your ajr is with Abu Abdullah, inshallah. Tonight is the second speech and the second lecture in this series of majalis that began last night in commemoration of this year's Moharram al-Haram. And the verse that I chose for the remainder, inshallah, or as far as we go, these ayat are from chapter number 89 from the Holy Quran, the last 4 ayat. The very famous chapter known as Surah Al-Fajr, which begins with a qasam, which begins with a swear and oath from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And tonight, inshallah, while I go into a little bit of tafsir of this ayat, we will also be doing what is called tabyin mawzu' sukhanrani. Inshallah, we'll be explaining the topic of our discussion in detail. And inshallah, we will be pursuing this topic in the remainder nights that we have for this series of majalis. Very briefly, this chapter of Quran, which is chapter number 89, we find that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this chapter begins it with an oath. It says, wal fajr, by the dawn. It is interesting study, and it invites us to look into the ayat of Quran. It invites us to ponder and contemplate in the ayat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that how some of these verses begin with an oath. Now, there are many reasons that could be explained and that are explained by Mufassirin as to why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bring an oath in the beginning of his kalam. I guess you can't really blame the Arabs nowadays, as they also bring baqasam, or they begin their sentences with some sort of qasam. So hardly I know an Arab brother or sister, even some of them are family, they have this habit of beginning their sentences by saying wallahi, and this wallahi is basically a qasam. And so this is also a custom in the holy book, in the Quran as well, that this chapter number 89, known as Surah Fajr, begins with a similar qasam. It says, wal fajr wa layalin ashr, by the dawn and by the 10 nights. Layalin ashr are 10 nights. There's a debate amongst the Mufassirin as to what are these 10 nights. Some believe that these are the 10 nights of Muharram al-Haram, the first 10 initial nights of this month leading up to the day of Ashura. So Ashura is the 10th day, and these 10 nights are being referred to as the tatbiq of this ayat. Now, I use the word tatbiq. You might be wondering, what is tatbiq? There are two explanations when it comes to Quran. One is called the tafsir, and one is called the tatbiq. Tatbiq means mutabiqat, how you implement things, and tafsir, of course, is the tabyin and the explanation of that ayat, which deals with sha'n and nuzul, when the ayat was revealed, what is the context of revelation. With that said, now the verses of Quran were done revealing in the 11th year after Hijrah, at the time of the wafat of the Holy Prophet. So how do you consider this to be having mutabaqat with someone who passed away, or shahadat of Sayyid al-Shuhada, which is in the 61st year after Hijrah. That's why we say it's not the tafsir of Quran, it is the tatbiq of the ayat of Quran. So with that said, we see that what is the reason behind the ayat beginning with a swear, beginning with an oath. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, wal fajr, by the dawn, walayalin ashr, and by the 10 nights. By the way, those 10 nights are also referred to as the last 10 nights of the month of Ramadan. And in some riwayat, it is mentioned to be the first 10 nights of the month of Dhul Hijjah, leading up to Eid al-Adha. So these are different variations that you find as far as the tafsir is concerned. Regardless, one of them is the first 10 nights of Muharram al-Haram. Going back to the initial question as to why is it that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is using an oath? Does he really need to use an oath? When I gave you an example, the majority of our Arab brothers and sisters, when they speak, they use the word wallahi. Why? Because maybe there is a custom that they want their listener to believe in what they're saying. If someone does not believe in what I'm saying, I will use qasam. By God, this is how it is. That adds a value to my kalam. Without it, of course, if someone trusts me, believes in me, then I don't really need this, qasam. But if someone is having a hard time believing in my words, then I'll utilize this qasam. That is true with ordinary people. But why with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? This is where the question arises. To answer this, is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not need people to be convinced. He can care less if people are convinced or not. This is his kalam, which is filled with wisdom, and there's hikmat in it. People follow it, so be it. They don't follow it, so be it. But the Holy Prophet, whose duty it is to go ahead and deliver this message, when he's delivering this message, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as he has given this Quran as miracle to him, it is no less than a miracle. It is in fact the miracle of the Holy Prophet. Every Nabi was given some sort of miracle of their time. Prophet was given Quran to be his miracle. So when Prophet is given this miracle and he's delivering this message, it needs to be superior to the kalam of the people. And that's what this Quran produced. It produced ayat which are magnificent. Because at that time in Arabia, people were filled with poetry and prose. They were experts. And even today in our adabiyat, in our literature, we use some of those, masterpieces from the time of Jahiliyyah because they were so extraordinary. But Quran, in order to go ahead and tackle that, Prophet, in order to go ahead and, tackle these poetry and the prose of that time, has to produce a kalam which takes, the attention of the people. So the kalam begins by the word wal fajr. Now right away, it grabs the attention of the listener as to what is about to be said. By the dawn? And when they hear this, now it is undivided attention. And then Prophet gives them the entire revelation that came down upon him. That's one reason. Second is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes an oath in order to emphasize that particular object. So therefore, he has taken an oath by all of the different times that exist in the daytime, in all day and all night. So for example, during the day, you have the morning hours, you have the midday, you have the noon, you have afternoon, you have evening, you have night. All of these different times have been sworn upon in Quran. Why? Because waqt, awqat, this time is of essence. It is important. We should not waste our times. We should not squander our time. We should be very mindful of our time, how we spend it. We would be held questionable, accountable, how we spend our time. And so with that said, we find that time is very important. There was a person, it's a hikayat, that there was a person in Arabia, in Arab country, who was selling ice. Today you go to a superstore and you buy, ice pack ice or pack of ice for your, whatever it is that you need it for. But back in the day, if you grew up in, you know, back home in Afghanistan, in Iran, in Pakistan, you would see that people used to sell the ice, and they would be selling it, especially during the hot days. And so this person who was selling ice, he was saying, irhamu man yadhubu ra'su malih, have mercy on someone whose investment is melting away. What did it mean? He said, buy this ice from me before it all melts away and it becomes what? Water. And then it will not be of any use to me. As long as it's munjamid, as long as it's frozen, is in the state of ice, it is useful. I can sell it. But if it becomes water, then it just drain away. No one will buy it. There's no price for it. Irhamu, have mercy. Buy this investment of mine before it melts away. Apparently, this hikayat is used to give a meaning to us, which is that this hikayat is telling us the reality of life. That life is like this. Your life is constantly melting away unless you do what? Unless you go ahead and utilize it and use it properly. So that's one of the reasons we find that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has sworn by different times during the day. You find wal asr, you find wal layl, you find wal nahar, you find wal subh, you find wal fajr, you find wal duha. All of these are different times that have been mentioned in Quran, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has taken an oath by each and every single one of them. And then layalina ashr wal shaf'i wal watr, that they're odd and they're even. And then the ayat begins. The concern and the discussion tonight is last 4 ayat from this chapter known as Surah Wal-Fajr. Inshallah, every day I will do a little bit of tafsir, so we connect ourselves with Quran and we do not neglect Quran. Alhamdulillah, we begin with the recitation of Quran, beautiful recitation, and we continue it during our speeches as well by diving into this book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The ayah begins by saying, Ya ayyatuhan nafsul mutma'inna, O the soul at peace, irji'i ila rabbiki radiyatan mardiyah, return to your Lord in the state that you are pleased and well pleasing, and He is pleased with you. This is one way of translating it, but the translation is return to your Lord pleased and pleasing. And so they translate that Radi is you, Mardi is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Fadkhuli fi ibadi, then enter among my servants. Wadkhuli jannati, and enter my paradise. We look at these 4 ayat. One of the questions that arises, and I have already mentioned the 2 ways of looking at the ayat of Quran, tafsir and the tatbiq. The interpretation, which is the tafsir, and implementation, which is the tatbiq. One topic, 4 ayat. Why Quran has these verses when there's one topic? Why 4 of these verses? Well, the topic is one. One nafse mutma'in is being addressed, while Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala explains it in 4 different ayat. If I hadn't mentioned, maybe someone thought that this was just one verse. No, these are 4 verses. Ya ayyatuhan nafsul mutma'inna is 27. Irji'i ila rabbiki radiyatan mardiyah is 28. Fadkhuli fi ibadi is 29. Wadkhuli jannati is 30. And that is the last ayat. We find that in Surah Fatiha, there are 7 ayat. From the beginning to the end, message of Surah Fatiha is very common, very simple, very same, similar in its entirety. You begin by praising God Almighty. You praise Him that He's the Lord. And then you mention that we worship You and we seek assistance from You. Keep us on the right path and don't make us amongst those who are a recipient of Your anger and have gone astray. But it's broken down into 7 ayat, piece by piece. I'm reciting, hopefully with fluency, in front of you. But whenever a speaker begins, they speak slowly, they speak softly, they start to pick up the speed as they go along. Does that mean that they did not know how to speak initially? No, they knew how to speak initially. But this is how the custom is. When you start speaking, you go slow. And then you learn that you're running out of your time, so you start rushing. So pauses in speech means that I want you to pay attention. When I pause somewhere, when I stop somewhere, I want you to ponder, contemplate. Tafakkur is required. So I don't rush through things. I stop so that you do what? You ponder, you think about it. Otherwise, you can just sit and read Quran yourself. You don't really need me to do this tabyin and explanation. For example, the host announces that today is the 2nd of Moharram al-Haram, and inshallah Ashura will be, according to where you are, Sunday, August 30th. Program starts at 9 p.m. or 9:15 p.m. with the recitation of Holy Quran, and then the speech in English, and then we have some poetry in Farsi, and then we have a speech in Farsi. And then on the night of Ashur, we have this program. On the day of Ashur, we have this program. You announce all of these things. An onlooker or the listener might say, can you repeat this? So you repeat it every night. Why? Because, it was difficult for people to comprehend all of these details all at once. So it is good that you pause when you're announcing. Announcer should pause in between to give time for people to do what? To retain what is being said and then move forward. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to focus and be attentive toward each and every single verse that He has revealed. So we get the message, and as well as we take heed in what is being explained. Inshallah, tomorrow I will go further as far as this ayat and the explanation of these 4 ayat is concerned. I haven't even touched upon these ayat. I haven't even talked about these ayat. Every single word of this ayat requires our utmost attention. When we say Ya ayyatuhan nafsul mutma'inna, the word Ya is harf munada. And nafs, it has its own discussion. Pandora's box. What is nafs? What is the situation with nafs? Yas'alunaka, when they ask you about ruh, tell them it's amra rabbi. We haven't talked about mutma'inna, the concept of Rabb, the concept of Radiya and Mardiya, the concept of Ibad, and the concept of Jannat. All of these, inshallah, in the coming nights, I will discuss. So we cover brief history and tafsir and implementation along with interpretation of the ayat of Quran, and we also continue with the discussions that we have on hand. So I'll be content with this much explanation tonight, and inshallah tomorrow I will mention more about this ayat or these ayat, so that at least we keep and we retain the information. If I give you all the information tonight about these ayat, maybe it is possible that you won't remember. So inshallah we'll take it slowly and gradually, and we'll give you only short bits of pieces as we go along. Tonight I want to explain the topic. The topic that we have chosen for these discussions, or the discussions in these nights, are lessons from Ashura, especially lessons pertaining to us, you and I, living in this part of the world. Now, of course, the movement of Imam Hussain, Sayyid al-Shuhada, is universal. Every single person can learn from this movement of Sayyid al-Shuhada. And you and I, who are the followers and we believe in the divine imamat of Sayyid al-Shuhada, we should be the first ones to learn a great deal from his movement. Know the motives behind the movement of Imam Hussain. His motives were not to gain some sort of fame. He already was famous. His motives were not some sort of political gain. He was already a known figure. And if he wanted to start a political career, he could have. His motives, was it for wealth? He didn't really need or care for the wealth. He's the leader of the youth of paradise. What does he need wealth for? And plus, they had enough. That amongst one of the incidents that we hear, that when the son of Imam recited Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Imam gave so much to the teacher of his son who taught him how to recite Quran. This is dealing with those who are mu'allimeen of Quran. They make sure that you take good care of them. So we find that lessons from Ashura, just the explanation of the topic, and we'll maybe get into the first part of it. What is a message and how is it learned? I'll explain that. Because we need to learn what are these messages from Karbala? What are these messages from Ashura? What are these lessons that we're talking about? And what is a message itself? How do you derive a message? That itself has a discussion. First, we will talk about lessons pertaining to our belief from Ashura. For example, Tawheed, Dar Aqideh wa Amal. We'll talk about Mabda' wa Ma'ad. We'll talk about the Risalat of Payghambar Islam, Hazrat Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. We'll also discuss the concept of Shafa'at, Imamat, and Bid'at Satizi, anti-heretical. These are the lessons, yes, we can derive from Ashura. And I will only be utilizing the kalam and the movement of Sayyid al-Shuhada. Second, lessons pertaining to ethics and morality, such as freedom, such as sacrifice, such as honoring mankind, doing tawakkul and having reliance upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Jihad bin nafs, bravery, valor, sabr, your patience, and steadfastness. We'll talk about modesty, hijab, and loyalty as well. All of these could be derived from these 9 days of Karbala that took place. Today is the second. Today is the day when Ahl Haram, they entered the land of Karbala, right? And they stayed there till the 11th of Moharram al-Haram, and then they left for Kufa after the Shahadat of Sayyid al-Shuhada. So they only stayed there for how long? They only stayed there for 9 days. But in these 9 days, you find all of these lessons that are hidden. We'll talk about lessons about the reality of the life. Haqiqat zindagi. What is the mafhum of this life? Is it just a test for us? We'll also discuss nations that Quran talks about being dead or alive. Yes, there are nations that are dead, just like there are people who are dead and alive. And I don't mean that when a person passes away, we bury them dead. No, walking dead and walking alive. There's a apparent misunderstanding and confusion about victory and defeat. Yazid is thinking that he has won. Ibn Ziyad is thinking that he has won. That they have defeated Imam Hussain by killing him and his companions and his family members, by making them asir and captive. They have won. This is their concept of victory. Or this is the concept of defeating someone. How bad, how wrong were they? And of course, how can we forget the concept of shahadat? The concept of martyrdom. This entire journey ends with a great shahadat. Dhibh azim. World is a dream and the hereafter is an awakening. These are the messages that we see in the kalam of Imam Hussain. And then there are mystical lessons from Ashura. Payamhoye Irfani. such as love of God. What is the whole purpose behind this? To attain the satisfaction of Ilahi. That's why we find Janab Zainab Salamullah alayha, after all that she went through, after all the struggles a lady could go through, seeing her kids die, seeing her brother get killed, her brothers, and seeing, other great ashab be killed mercilessly. Yet, she says, what? Ma ra'aytu illa jamila. I see nothing but beauty. There was calamity. They were afflicted. وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ مِّنَ الْخَوْفِ وَالْجُوعِ وَنَقْصٍ مِّنَ الْأَمْوَالِ وَالْأَنفُسِ وَالثَّمَرَاتِ وَبَشِّرِ الصَّابِرِينَ الَّذِينَ إِذَا أَصَابَتْهُمْ مُصِيبَةٌ قَالُوا إِنَّا لِلَّهِ وَإِنَّا إِلَيْهِ رَاجِعُونَ. So there's calamity. There's affliction that you find in Karbala. But you remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So there's remembrance of God as well. There's sacrifice in the way of Allah, which is not perishing and dying when you sacrifice for a cause that is above and beyond you. There's rida and taslim, being content with what you have and being submissive. All of these, brothers and the listeners and sisters, are topics of their own. You would say, well, this might take, a month to discuss all of these things. It would not be justice done to these topics, but I will try. And then, while there's a concept of victory and there's a concept of defeat, there's a concept of fawz and victory, which is ultimate. We find qiyam fi sabilillah, rising for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is the real victory. Number 6, we find historical lessons from Ashura. We will look at, inshallah, the history of Islam or Muslims. They're two different things. We will look into the roots of Ashura. I will hint, did Ashura start in the year 60 after Hijrah? Or the roots of the Ashura begin from the father of Yazid? Or you have to dig further back, and you might even find the roots of Ashura in Thaqifa Bani Sa'ida. You will find Itmam Hujjat, the ultimatum that is given by every shaheed. Even the 6-month-old of Imam Hussain gives ultimatum. When Imam is carrying him on his hands and he's taking him to the battlefield, Imam says to him, what? Oh, my son, Abdullah al-Radi al-Yazghar, I have brought you. Now it is your duty to do and give ultimatum. For Itmam Hujjat, it is mentioned that Abdullah al-Radi al-Yazghar, he rubbed his dry tongue over his lips. That was Itmam Hujjat. Honoring the vicious and dishonoring the kind. We find that very common theme in history of Karbala and Ashura. Number 7, we'll find and look into some of the political lessons that we can derive from Ashura. The kalam of Sayyid al-Shuhada shapes and gives us direction as far as the politics is concerned, which could be applicable today as well. And then there are lessons of Ihya Gari, the revival. This deen, I spoke about it last night as well, which was taken to its heights. There's this constant tanazzul and downfall, which brings it to the point where someone has to sacrifice to do what? Ihya Gari, revive this religion. So we'll talk about that. And last but not least, we will talk about the lessons for our sisters, lessons for the women and from the women that were present in Karbala. So this is the Tabyin Mawzu'e Suhan, inshallah, that what we will be discussing in the nights to come. So hopefully I have gotten you intrigued and interested in knowing what is up for grab, and inshallah what we will be talking about in the nights to come. So we will begin tonight with understanding as to what is message and how it is learned. And inshallah, we will touch briefly on Tawheed, Dar Aqideh wa Amal, as far as the lessons on belief is concerned, deriving from this Ashura and Karbala. As far as the mafhum of message and the lesson, so this bayan, this paygam, this message, this lesson, this, this ta'bir that we have, that you take ibrat, what is the mafhum? What is the understanding of it? Message is a command which is passed down to those who are being addressed. So this discussion that I'm having, for my youngsters, it's a message. For my adults, it's just a reminder. For my seniors, for example, it's just a reminder. But for my youngsters, it's a message. This talk that I'm having, or when you listen to anyone's lecture or speech, what is it containing? It contains a message. And so what is the message of the speech? The message of the speech is ABC. So message is a command which is passed down to those who are being addressed, so they can act according to that. Sometimes message is apparent, wadih, mubayyan. Sometimes the message is hidden. It's makhfi. It's concealed. It's not as apparent. And I'll give you examples. Even some of the ayat of Quran, not just some, in fact, every ayat of Quran has an apparent and then has an implied hidden meaning. So there's a concept in usul al-fiqh known as mantuq wa mafhum. Mantuq ayat, or the mafhum of ayat. Mantuq is the apparent meaning. For example, you read the ayat of Quran which says, قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ. What is the mantuq? What is the apparent meaning? Apparent meaning is, tell him, a prophet, say that Allah is one. Now what is the mafhum? Mafhum is, say that Allah are not two or more than one. That's the mafhum, that's the understanding. Whenever you see something or hear something, the apparent meaning and the implied meaning is there. So you look at the ayat of Quran, you find that there are many verses of Quran that are, the mafhum is there, rather the mantuq is there. People understand the mantuq of it, the apparent meaning, but they fail to understand the mafhum of it. I'll give you an example. In chapter Hujurat, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there's an ayat in the Quran which mentions, إِن جَاءَكُمْ فَاسِقٌ بِنَبَإٍ فَتَبَيَّنُوا. If a fasiq, someone who commits, a sin openly, who commits sins openly, comes to you, فَتَبَيَّنُوا. So for example, a news bearer comes to you and gives you some sort of news. You do what? You explain this news to them. You tell them that this news is being given, and this news, you do what? Tabayyan. You ponder over this news. You look into this news. You don't just take the news right away. So this ayat could be referring towards Fox News today. Now when you hear something on Fox News, don't take it right away. Ponder. Think about it. So if a fasiq is coming to you saying, there's a fire, there's a fire, don't take his words right away. Ponder. Now, of course, do your research as well. Don't get burned down if he was true in what he was saying. But if the ayat is saying, إِن جَاءَكُمْ فَاسِقٌ بِنَبَإٍ فَتَبَيَّنُوا, if you remove the word fasiq without doing tahrif in Quran, the apparent meaning is that if a fasiq comes to you with the news, ponder, contemplate, don't take it right away. It's telling you, the mafhum is, if a adil comes to you with the news, someone who's just comes to you with the news, then you don't need to do fatabayyanu. You don't need to, contemplate. You don't need to do ta'ammul. You take the news right away. You don't have to wait around to see if it is correct or not. That is the difference. So if a true source comes to you, you take the news. But if the false source, fasiq, comes to you, you don't take the news right away. Or, for example, there's an ayat in Surah Tawbah which the Wahhabis use to claim that standing on the graves is a bid'at. The ayat is that لا تقم على قبره ولا تصلي عليهم من مات أبدا. Don't stand on the grave and don't pray for the one who has passed ever. You look at this ayat and say, yes, that's what this ayat is saying. But if you continue on reading the ayat, it says, those فَإِنَّهُمْ كَفَرُوا, those who have disbelieved, don't stand on their graves and don't pray for them ever, those who have disbelieved, because your prayer for them will not have any value. So for example, if I stand on the grave of Yazid, of course, if I know where this grave of Yazid is, don't pray for him, or anyone for that matter. That's what the ayat of Quran is saying. But if the ayat, the apparent meaning is, don't stand on the grave of a kafir, a disbeliever, and pray, the mafhum of the ayat is what? That you can stand on the grave of a mu'min. Nothing wrong with that. Awliya Allah, nothing wrong with that. That's why we stand at the grave of Ma'asumeen, and we stand at the grave of the Holy Prophet. But you'll see them telling it's bid'at. You go to Jannatul Baqi to pay a tribute and recite the ziyarat of the 4 Ma'asumeen that are buried there. They say, oh, move along. Bid'at. Although we're not even close to the grave, we're far away from it because there's a divider. So right here, the ayat of Quran is being misused. The mantuq of the ayat tells you, don't stand at the qabr of someone who's a kafir. But the mafhum of the ayat is that it's okay for you to stand at the grave of someone who's a mu'min and even pray. So you find this is the message is also apparent and hidden. Sometimes the messages can be words and sometimes it could be actions. For example, I'm speaking, so all of my messages are words right now. But sometimes I don't even have to speak. I do certain things that carries a message. Some of my actions are enough to convey a message. And that's what we find in Karbala as well. It's not necessarily that Imam Hussain was constantly speaking, constantly giving words of wisdom. He was, and we have those as messages. But sometimes some of the acts of Sayyid al-Shuhada and his companions were what? Messages for us. Sometimes it is by an individual. Sometimes it is by a jama'at altogether. Sometimes an accident can bear message for the people. An accident takes place that is carrying a message for you. There's a message in it for you. If you see an accident happen in front of your eyes, you take heed. You take ibrat. Karbala, there's a lot of ibrat to take from it. Those who thought that by apparently killing Imam Hussain and his small army of 72 people and the young women and the children, harassing them, they could get away with it. They thought that they have achieved ultimate glory in the world. They were wrong. They were shown their faces and they were struck badly by God. Innama numli alayhim liyazdadu ithman. We give them respite so they may increase upon their sins. Yazid may not have been given the punishment right away. So that's where right after the event of Karbala, the following year he does what? He attacks the city of Madinatul Munawwarah. So why isn't Allah punishing him? لِيَزْدَادُ إِثْمًا, so that he would increase his sins further. The following year he attacks the Kaaba. And how his end comes about. So the punishment of Allah is silent. It comes, may be delayed, but the delay is only to go ahead and give these people respite so they may increase as far as their sins are concerned. In nahi anil munkar, by showing a frowned upon face, you can give a message. If you know the conditions of amr bil maruf and nahi anil munkar, and more so nahi anil munkar, the three stages of it, right? First, you show it through your hearts, then through your tongue, and then, of course, through punishment. Through your heart, how is it? For example, you saw a brother, forget a brother. I usually give this example, but I don't like it myself. You saw a child do something wrong. You don't say anything. You just show them the face and you don't talk to them. For example, your own son did something in the house, broke something, and he knows that you know, and you just show him the face as if you're not talking to him. That itself is what? That's a message in there for the child. That's enough sometimes for the correction. It doesn't have to be more than that. You saw a brother, God forbid, drinking alcohol. You start showing it by, not talking to him, by showing them a cold shoulder. You stop talking. They'll realize it if they're good friends of yours. Why aren't you talking to me? Then you go ahead and say it. Brother, because I saw you do that. So this is where we see the messages are carried even in our actions. Sometimes those responsible for an incident didn't even give a message, but we can still derive messages from it by merely paying attention. Some of the companions in Karbala, they didn't intend on giving messages. For example, mother of Wahab Kalbi, Wahab, who was a Christian, came for the Nusrat of Imam Hussain. He died. His head was severed and it was thrown to the mother. And this brave lady picked up the head of her son. Instead of kissing it, keeping it as a souvenir, as the last, nishani, she picks it up and she throws it back. Saying what? Saying what we have given in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we don't take it back. In her mind, she did that on that instincts of her. But there's a message in there for us. Huge message. I mean, I can speak on and on and as I speak, I get goosebumps as to what courage this lady had. That her only son, who had just recently gotten married, and now he's killed, his head is severed, and the head is thrown back. She should cherish it. Instead, she throws it back at the enemy. Here, take it. What we've given in the way of Allah, we don't need it back. So therefore, when we talk about messages from Ashura, it isn't limited to the sayings of Imam and his companions only, but it is also included as far as their actions are concerned. I know I have run out of my time, and I will resume from this very step, from this very place, inshallah, that how every step of the way, there are things that we can derive from Karbala. We look at this journey of Imam Hussain. We talked about last night the martyrdom of Muslim ibn Aqil. Imam Hussain, when he made this journey of his, when he left the city of Makkah al-Mukarramah, in some riwayat, Imam could not finish his Hajj because they had come to take his life there. Imam left and fled the city of Makkah with his family because he did not want to desecrate the sanctity of the city of Makkah. He did not want his blood to be shed in that city. Imam left. And there are different manazil that Imam goes through. And every manzil that Imam went past, There were people coming from Kufa telling him, return, don't go. Why? Because the Kufans have turned their backs against you. Their hearts may be with you, but their swords are against you. But Imam continued his journey until the time Imam heard the news that Muslim ibn Aqil had been martyred. At that point, in the Maqam of Dhu Husm, when Imam runs into the army of Hurr ibn Yazid Riyahi, inshallah I'll talk about Hurr in the nights to come. When Imam stopped over there, Imam has different intentions. Yeah, Hurr says, I'm here to take you to Kufa. Imam says, no, I don't want to go to Kufa. Let me go to another direction. He said, I have strict orders. So you see, up until this point, Imam was persistent in going to Kufa. But the moment he hears about the shahadat of Muslim, Imam says, there's no way for me to go further. But here is Hurr, who stops Imam Hussain and says, I have strict orders that I must bring you to the Amir in Kufa. Imam refuses to go. They won't allow Imam to go in any other direction. Then Imam says, let's move in a direction toward Kufa, but not to Kufa. He agrees, and they move in that direction together. And Imam passes through different manazil until he arrives at a place where Imam's horse would not move, would not go any further. Imam requested another horse. He got on top of it. Even that horse did not move. Riwayat mentioned that Imam changed 7 different horses, but none of them wanted to move further, and they all refused. Imam asked the people of that land, what is this place called? They responded that this place is called Ghadariya. Imam said, there must be another name. They said, this place is called Nainawa. Imam said, there must be another name. They said, this place is called Shati Furat. Imam said, is there another name for this place? Because none of them sound familiar. Then someone local said, this place is called Karbala. Imam responded, Ha huna karbun wa bala. This is the place known as for karb, difficulty, and bala, musibat. This is the place where our children will be sacrificed. This is the place where we will be killed and slaughtered. And this is the place where our ladies, their chadars and their veils will be stolen and snatched from them. This is the place where they will be made captives. And this is the place where our blood will be shed. Imam Hussain mentioned all of that. They arrive in the land of Karbala. Imam does first thing first. He asks the people of Bani Asad. Imam purchases that land. He buys it and he pays them the amount right away. He says, this is the place where we will be killed, and I am purchasing it in advance so that you can go ahead and bury me and my companions in this land. But comes the day of Ashur, when Imam Hussain and his companions are all martyred. Not just that they're martyrs, but their bodies been severed from their heads. Not just that their bodies have been severed, but the horses are trampling the bodies of Imam Hussain and his companions. And at that moment, until the people of Umar Asad were still there, Bani Asad did not come out. It is mentioned for 3 days the body of Imam Hussain and his companions lay in the plains of Karbala. ألا لعنة الله القوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. Allah, please accept our